All right, welcome to another deep dive. Today we're tackling
Tiantai Buddhism.
That's right, Tiantai Buddhism, and I'm excited about this one. For our listeners, we really try to dig into the core ideas of any system of thought, and I think Tiantai offers
particularly rich set of philosophical arguments.
Yes, and we have our trusty guide here, the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy entry on Tiantai Buddhism, and this is,
it's a great entry.
It really is. It's quite thorough, and it's written for philosophers by philosophers, which I always appreciate. So our mission today, as always, is to sort of extract the key insights from this entry, and we're going to focus on three main figures in the Tiantai tradition.
Yep.
That's Tiantai Zi, who lived in the 6th century, Jingxi Zanran, who lived in the 8th century,
and Sima Zili.
And Sima Zili, yes, who lived in the 10th and 11th centuries. So, to kick things off, maybe we can dive right into.
Well, I think one of the
core ideas here.
I think one of the most striking things about Tiantai is their radical form of contextualism. This is something that I think really sets them apart, even from other Buddhist schools. For Tiantai thinkers, the nature of anything, like its identity or its ontological status, what it is.
Right.
It's not fixed. It's not inherent. It's totally dependent on its context. It's totally dependent on the relationships that it has to other things.
Yeah. So it's not just like things are kind of nudged around by their context. It's that
they're constituted by those.
They buy it.
Yeah. So if you're used to thinking about
really thoroughgoing
objects as having like a core,
it's a thoroughgoing
kind of independent essence.
Contextualism too.
Right. It's not like you can just say, well, up to this point it's contextual, but beyond this point it has its own thing. It's like turtles all the way down.
Yeah. So everything is kind of like fundamentally interconnected.
Yeah. And that's where the monotheism comes in. Yeah. They reject this idea that there are like fundamental categories of being that exist independently.
Yeah.
It's like ultimately everything is part of this one seamless reality.
Yeah. And this isn't just some kind of abstract, distant unity. The source really emphasizes this thoroughgoing immanence. It's like everything we experience is part of this.
Yeah, it's all happening right here.
Yeah.
There's not a separate transcendent realm.
Right.
That's somehow cut off from our experience.
Totally. So what are some of the...
So this is huge implications.
Yeah.
If everything is immanent, if everything is part of this one interconnected reality, then that means everything's impermanent.
Yeah.
It's constantly changing. There are no fundamental unchanging substances. Everything is sort of constitutively ambiguous.
Yeah. It's really interesting too, because I feel like
a lot of our philosophical projects are based on
epistemological concepts.
Trying to find that core essence, like trying to define something in and of itself.
Yeah, but for Tiantai, that's a non-starter. It's like that project is doomed to fail because there's no such thing as a thing in and of itself.
Yeah. So what about ethics? How does this view of?
Well, yeah, this is really interesting too, because if reality is so fluid, if everything's interconnected and changing, then what does that mean for ethics? Can we really have fixed goals? Can we really have absolute moral rules?
Right.
Tiantai is a bit skeptical about those kinds of things.
Yeah. So it's almost a renunciation of those finite aims or fixed moral rules.
It's not that they're saying those things are bad. It's just that they're saying that they're always going to be contextual. They're always going to be dependent on the situation.
Yeah. And I guess that kind of leads us to this other really, really interesting idea in Tiantai, which is
self-recontextualization.
Yes, self-recontextualization. Which I don't even know.
It's a mouthful. I know
where to begin with this one. It's so fascinating.
It is, and I think it's one of the things that really makes Tiantai stand out as a unique form of Buddhism and a really interesting philosophical system. So, we've been talking about how everything's contextual, right?
Right.
For Tiantai, it's not enough to just say that. They take that idea and they push it to its absolute limit.
Yeah.
So they say that if you really think about any determinate, entity, any specific thing, and you try to define it and understand it, you'll eventually reach a point where it kind of overcomes itself. It negates itself. It becomes something other
than what it initially seemed to be.
So, like, by defining something, you kind of
you sort of
destroy its definition.
Rip it open.
Yeah. It's so interesting. It's a kind of dialectical move.
Yeah.
But it's not a dialectic in the Hegelian sense or in the Marxist sense.
Right.
It's not about a linear progression.
Right.
It's more about this idea of natural cycles.
Yeah.
This idea that extremes lead to reversals.
Yeah. And I guess this idea comes from both like ancient Chinese thought.
Yes.
And also Indian Buddhism.
Exactly. So on the one hand, you have this, ancient Chinese idea of yin and yang, the idea that opposites are interconnected, that they transform into each other.
Yeah.
And then on the other hand, you have this, Indian Buddhist logic of conditionality, the idea that everything arises dependently, that nothing exists independently. And so Tiantai is bringing those two traditions together.
In this really interesting way.
And so how does, how does this principle of self-recontextualization, how does it apply to those thoroughgoing ideas? Let's start with thoroughgoing contextualism.
Yeah.
What does that become?
Well, so if everything's if everything's getting its meaning from its context, then that means that each context is also an entity that's contextualized.
Right.
So it's like a self-referential loop. And so what this leads to is a kind of self-validation for everything. Because if everything's getting its meaning from everything else, then ultimately everything is sort of grounding itself.
Yeah. And so what about thoroughgoing holism?
Well, thoroughgoing holism actually flips into a kind of thoroughgoing individualism.
Yeah.
Because if the ultimate reality is a seamless whole, then every individual part of that whole, by virtue of being interconnected with everything else, is also, in a sense, the whole.
So each part...
Yeah, it was like a hologram.
Yeah.
Each
contains the whole.
So what about thoroughgoing monism? What does...
Well, that flips into a thoroughgoing pluralism.
Okay.
Because if you have this ultimate unity, then that unity is going to express itself in an infinite number of ways. It's going to manifest itself in an infinite number of forms and relationships.
And what about...
And perhaps the most mind-bending one is that thoroughgoing immanentism actually becomes thoroughgoing transcendentalism.
Whoa.
And Tiantai is saying that these two things, which seem completely opposed to each other, are actually synonyms.
So it's like these binaries that were...
Yeah, it's so used to thinking binaries are breaking down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's wild. So I guess what you're saying is that...
So you have things like, impermanence and permanence becoming synonyms. You have anti-substantialism, which is the idea that there are no inherent substances, becoming a kind of ultimate substantialism.
Right. You have anti-realism, which is the idea that there's no independent reality, becoming a kind of absolute realism. And you even have skepticism.
What about
becoming trivialism? Yeah. The idea that every claim is true in some sense.
Right. So the renunciation of finite aims becomes an endorsement?
A renunciation of fixed moral rules becomes an endorsement
of all aims.
Of all moral rules.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So, how does reality actually work then? After?
So, the picture that emerges is that every event, every experience is a kind of collaboration between all beings.
Okay.
Both sentient and insentient. So everything is kind of working together.
Oh, wow.
To produce each moment of experience. And each moment of experience is like a unique expression of the whole of reality.
Yeah. But these expressions, these events, they're not just random fleeting things.
No, they're not. They're unconditional, they're ineradicable, they're eternal.
Wow.
And they're omnipresent.
So it's every moment is kind of
every moment is like the whole universe being born and dying.
Yeah.
And the other really interesting thing here is that all of the things that we normally think of as opposites, like good and evil, or delusion and enlightenment, they're all inherently entailed in every event.
So there's no separate...
There's no dualism.
Yeah.
It's all interpenetrated.
And so how do these different aspects, how do they relate to each other? Because it's not like they're just kind of mashed together, right?
They're not just mashed together. Tiantai uses this concept of intersubsumption, which is a really interesting idea. So the idea is that any one aspect of reality, like goodness, it includes all the other aspects.
Yeah.
So goodness includes evil. But at the same time, it's also included by all the other aspects. Right. So goodness is included in evil.
So it's like it's both containing and being contained.
Exactly. And this applies to everything.
Okay, so like, give me an example. Like, how does this apply to something like, say, Buddhahood and deviltry?
Well, the classic example that Tiantai gives is that every event in the world is both completely Buddhahood and completely deviltry.
Whoa.
So it's not like there's a little bit of Buddhahood over here and a little bit of deviltry over there.
Right.
It's like every single event,
it's
both things.
all the way through.
All the way through.
Yeah.
And the same goes for any other pair of opposites.
Okay, so like delusion and enlightenment.
Delusion and enlightenment, good and bad. Every moment is all of those things simultaneously.
Yeah. That's that's a powerful way to think about it. So like shifting gears a little bit, how does Tiantai view experience itself? Like, how do we actually perceive?
In traditional Buddhism, you often have this idea of
reality,
the sense organ and the object and consciousness, right? Like these three things working together to create experience. But in Tiantai, they say that each of those three things is itself the absolute.
Okay.
It's the entirety of reality.
Wow.
Expressing itself in that particular form.
So it's like even our most basic, like
even just seeing a cup of coffee is a manifestation of the absolute.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. And this kind of leads us to this like really important idea, which is Tiantai's
A three truths.
Yes. The three truths. And this is, it's like
This is their big innovation.
Yeah.
I mean, they're really known for this.
Yeah. Yeah. And the source says that. It's the thing that they really renovated Buddhism with.
Yeah. They took this idea of the two truths, which was common in other Mahayana schools, and they sort of pushed it to the next level.
Yeah. Yeah. And so what exactly are the three truths? Like, how do they differ from?
So three truths can be kind of summed up in this claim that no entity can be said to be either the same as or different from any other entity.
Neither same nor different. That's a real head scratcher.
Yeah, it is.
I mean, that seems to violate, basic logic.
It does. It definitely challenges our ordinary ways of thinking. But for Tiantai, this isn't just some, mystical statement about the ultimate reality. It's a logical principle that applies to everything.
Okay, so how does it work? How can something be neither same nor different?
Well, they call this the asness relation.
Yeah.
So, again, it's the each determinate thing, let's say this cup of coffee. It's not just this cup of coffee. It's also the totality of all other possible things as this cup of coffee.
Okay, so, it's got the potential to be.
It's got the potential to be
any other thing.
Yeah, it's like the DNA of everything else.
Oh, I see.
Is in this cup of coffee.
And the source, I think, uses this this really interesting thought experiment with a white marble and a monster horn to illustrate this point. Can you kind of
it's a great example.
Walk us through that.
So imagine you see this white marble, right? It's round, it's smooth. You pick it up, you think, okay, this is a white marble.
Right.
But then you look closer and you realize that it's actually attached to something. And as you keep looking, you realize that it's actually the tip of a giant green monster's horn.
Oh, wow.
So what you thought was a white marble is actually a sharp green horn.
Yeah.
And the point is that your initial perception of the white marble wasn't wrong.
Right.
It was just incomplete. It was based on a limited context.
Yeah. Yeah, I get that. And so, how does that relate to...
Well, so for Tiantai...
this asness relation.
To perceive something is always to perceive not all of it.
Right.
You're always seeing a fragment. You're always seeing a part that's being recontextualized by everything else.
So it's we're always kind of...
Yeah, we're always sort of...
missing the bigger picture.
Missing the bigger picture.
Yeah.
And they say that if you were to somehow see everything simultaneously, you would actually see nothing.
Oh.
Because perception requires contrast. It requires...
Right. If everything was just...
Yeah, if the universe was just a giant white sphere, you wouldn't be able to see anything.
Right, right. And so I guess what they're saying is that every determination we make is kind of...
Yeah, every determination is limited.
Limited, yeah.
It's provisional.
Yeah. And the source, I think, uses the example of, saying, this marble is sharp. Even that seemingly simple statement is kind of laden with all these...
The simple statement is making a claim about the entire universe.
Right. Because it's implying like a whole...
Yeah, it's implying that there's a context in which sharpness is meaningful.
Yeah, yeah. So I guess, like, how does this all relate back to the three truths? Like, where do provisional positing...
The three truths are a way of understanding how this all works.
Okay.
So the first truth is provisional positing, which basically just means that some X, some determinate thing is always appearing to us.
Right. We can't avoid seeing things.
Yeah, we can't escape that.
Yeah.
The second truth is emptiness, which means that X is not just X. It's also everything else. It's inherently ambiguous. It has more totitivity.
More toitivity. I like that.
It's always overflowing its own boundary.
Yeah, yeah. And so the center is...
And the center is the simultaneous unity of those two things.
Okay.
It's the recognition that they're not contradictory, but they're actually two sides of the same coin.
So it's like it's holding both of those things together.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I know the source talks about an exclusive center and a non-exclusive center. What's the distinction there?
The exclusive center is the idea that there's like a separate reality that's beyond both emptiness and provisional positing.
Right.
But the non-exclusive center, which is the more radical view, says that any two things, like let's say X and Y, they're also neither same nor different from each other.
Oh, okay. So it's like even the center.
So the center is not separate.
It's caught up in this.
It's just another expression of provisional positing and emptiness.
Okay. So like, we talked about holism before. How does Tiantai's contextualism develop into a particular kind of holism?
Rejects atomism.
Yeah.
They reject the idea that there are these fundamental independent building blocks of reality.
Right.
They say that everything is contextual. Everything gets its meaning from its relationship.
Right.
And so this leads to a kind of holism where the parts are dependent on the whole.
Right.
But then they take this holism and they apply self-recontextualization to it.
Okay. And what happens?
And what happens is that the whole itself becomes self-overcoming.
So like even
because if you say that the whole is everything, right? If you try to define the whole, you're going to end up with a definition that's so broad that it actually undermines itself.
Yeah. And the source, I think, uses these examples of like Thales and Heraclitus.
Yeah. So Thales said that everything is water.
Yeah.
And Heraclitus said that everything is fire. And at first glance, these seem like really unifying holistic claims.
Right. Like they're trying to find...
Yeah, they're trying to find that one thing that underlies everything.
Yeah, the fundamental principle.
But the problem is that if you really take those claims seriously, if you really say that everything is water or everything is fire, then you end up emptying those concepts of their meaning.
Oh. So like if everything's fire...
Yeah, if everything's fire, then what's not fire?
Fire doesn't mean anything.
Exactly. And so fire becomes synonymous with everything else.
Yeah.
It becomes synonymous with water and earth and air. So it's like, and so the whole project of finding this one thing that underlies everything kind of collapses on itself.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And so, we talked about like the two truths before, and I know there's this idea of like apophysis.
Right. So apophysis is this idea of defining something by saying what it's not. And in some Buddhist schools, the ultimate truth, emptiness, is often described in this way. It's like emptiness is not this, it's not that.
Right. So it's beyond all these
it's beyond
categories. It's ineffable.
Yeah. But like, what's the problem with that? Like, why do they say that apophysis
becomes trivialism?
Is that even the claim that emptiness is beyond concepts is itself a concept?
Oh.
So it's like you're still stuck in the realm.
So you can't escape
concepts.
You can't escape concepts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so you get into this infinite regress where you're constantly negating negations.
Yeah. Yeah. And so how does Tiantai...
So Tiantai resolves this problem by saying that emptiness is not a transcendent negation. It's actually a conditional assertion of unconditionality.
Okay, so like it's both conditional
and unconditional.
Not unconditional.
Okay, so like how does that work? Well, the idea is that everything is both conceivable and inconceivable.
Mm-hmm.
It's both determinate and indeterminate.
Okay.
It's both something and nothing.
Yeah, yeah. And so I guess that's how apophysis becomes trivialism?
Yeah, because if everything is both something and nothing, then every claim is true in some sense.
Right, so like every statement is kind of...
Every statement is kind of
true and false.
True and false, yeah. And that's what they mean by trivialism.
Yeah. And the source also talks about this idea of transformative self-recontextualization.
Right. So,
this is a way of understanding the relationship
going on there
between local coherence and global incoherence.
Okay.
So, we've been talking about everything's contextual, right?
Right.
And so you can have a statement that's locally coherent that makes sense within a particular context.
Right.
But when you try to universalize it, when you try to apply it to everything, it becomes globally incoherent.
Right. Like it breaks down. Yeah, it breaks down. But for Tiantai, those two things are actually interconnected.
Okay.
They're not separate. So they say that provisional truth, which is the realm of local coherence, is actually the cause of ultimate truth, which is the realm of global incoherence.
So, they're not...
Yeah, they're not opposed to each other.
In opposition.
They're actually two sides of the same coin.
Yeah, and the source, I think, uses this great example of, a joke.
Yeah, the joke analogy.
Yeah, the setup is...
So the setup of a joke isn't funny in itself.
Right.
But it becomes funny in retrospect after you've heard the punchline.
Right, because the punchline gives...
The punchline gives a new...
Gives a new context, yeah.
Yeah.
And so Tiantai is saying that reality is kind of like that.
Okay.
The things that we think are serious or true or important, they can actually be transformed into their opposites through a change in context.
Yeah. And this relates to this Mahayana idea that we're all already enlightened, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. So we're already enlightened, but we don't realize it.
Right.
And so the process of enlightenment is actually just a process of recontextualization.
Oh, I see.
It's a process of seeing things.
It's like seeing the joke.
In a new light, yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. That's great. So I guess, how does this apply to the Buddhist teachings themselves? How does
Tiantai takes this idea of recontextualization and they apply it to the Buddhist teachings as well.
Okay.
So, you have all these classic Buddhist teachings about impermanence and suffering and non-self and enlightenment.
Right.
But for Tiantai, the question is not just, are these teachings true? The question is, in what sense are they true?
Oh, okay.
And in what context are they liberating?
Right. So it's not about, rejecting them outright.
No, it's about understanding.
But we're standing
in their proper context.
Yeah. And I know they have this classification of teachings, right?
Yeah. They have this famous classification of teachings, which includes the Tripitaka teachings, the shared teachings, the separate teachings, and the perfect teachings.
Okay. And so are these 4 different sets of teachings?
Well, not exactly. They're more like 4 different ways of understanding the same teaching.
Okay.
So they're all considered true teachings in their own context, but they're just presented in different ways to suit different capacities and different levels of understanding.
Yeah. And the source says that, Z used this passage from the Mahaparinirvana Sutra as a model for this.
There's a famous passage in the Mahaparinirvana Sutra, post-speaker.